Looka Pie Pie by the Meters is our next segment. 12 songs, 32 minutes, a lean, mean album released pretty much as close to being in 1970 as you can be. I think it's late December 1969. So this very well may be the absolute latest album of the 60s.
It even says in Spotify that it's 1970. I don't know if you noticed that, but yeah, Spotify's wrong on that.
I did check on Wikipedia just to make sure there wasn't a misprint, but yeah, it was released in very late December 1969. So it does just slip in here. And I'm going to start the clock, guys. Are you ready to cold listen hot take this?
I am.
All right, Matt, the Meters. How well did you know them before you listened to this album?
Pretty much a name only.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've heard of them. I don't know where or how, but I certainly have. It's pretty much all instrumental, which I think I wasn't surprised by that. I wasn't expecting as I was listening.
I was for sure.
Yeah, no, because early on, I mean, I think the first song, "Look at Pie Pie," has some vocals. It's like a little bit of a call and response kind of thing almost, if I'm not mistaken. But I shortly into it, I'm like, oh yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it made sense. I think I heard that at some point. So it's very funky, and the thing I think that stands out the most for me is the drumming. I'm
glad you said that. Same thing for me, Matt.
That's by far my favorite part of this album. Overall, I don't. Do
you want to describe it for the listeners? Because it's a very distinct type of drumming.
Yes, and it also, one of the reasons that I like it so much is because it's very much present in a lot of the music that I like nowadays. If I think about like the drummer from Radiohead is very much like this. It's a lot of offbeats that he's doing, and he's doing just. It's certainly not traditional. It's sometimes fast. He's hitting a lot of things. There's a lot of hitting the cymbals and the hi-hats, and it's just a lot of just and it's a really a lot of offbeat. That's the best way I can describe it.
Offbeat, hi-hat heavy, pacey, but then lethargic at other points. Yeah, and very much built around playing off of the other instruments.
Yes, and it seems like, I think at times it might seem like he's just like totally like improvising, but I think it's also, with this type of drumming, it's also very intentional too. Yep. It's there's purpose behind it, and that's what I liked the most about this. Overall, as an album, I liked it. It also reminded me, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Medeski, Martin and Wood. It's like kind of like a trio. I think it's like bass, keyboards, and drums. And it's very similar to this. They're like kind of like a jazz fusion kind of trio, very similar. So I was also thinking of those guys when I listened to this. It all kind of blended together for me after a while. I felt like it was very, like, we've used the word samey. I think we're coining that term on CTS. It's a kind of a samey record, which to me took something away from it. I liked the beginning part of it better. I was like, oh, this is cool. Like it's definitely that, and I like the bass and I like the production, and it's certainly funky. And like I said, the drumming is the best part for me. But as it kind of progressed, I found myself becoming less interested with it, just because it was hitting that same note over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I think because it's also not the type of genre that I'm used to listening to a lot, it just all kind of blended together. So on one listen, I wasn't a huge fan of it as an overall piece, but there were certainly elements of it that I really did like. And it's got some great grooves. It's got some great, some of that funk stuff. This is probably like, my guess is this is like early, funk is what's happening here. And it was certainly, I'm sure that it was influential, but it was a little hard, kind of getting as into it towards the end as I was in the beginning.
Well, can I mention one thing before I kick to Josh? It's important. It's a 4-piece, and there are 4 instruments in this band. There's a guitar, an organ, a bass, and a drum. And I'm not looking that up, but it's very, very clear. It's those 4 instruments, because you hear.
There's nothing else.
You don't even need to look it up. It's just like, okay, there's the organ, there's the bass, there's the drum. It's pretty clear. So
no effects or anything like that. Yeah.
Right. And no, like, ooh, what are these other instruments in it? Like, it's clear that those 4 instruments are playing, and that's what's present. Period. So, okay, what do you think, Josh?
Yeah, I was not as high on this album on the listen that I gave. it does feel like another instance of a lot of influences coming together. I got a lot of jazz out of it. There was a lot of organ, like you said, but I also got the funk sound that Matt was talking about. I also heard a lot of Caribbean or Jamaican influence, almost like borderline ska, but it never went into the ska.
No, yeah.
But it was just kind of, I guess maybe like the beats or something like that. It just reminded me of that, and then that coupled with the organ made me think of that. I guess because it did, because there was no vocals, that took a little, detracted a little from me from it. And with the instrumentation, with just the 4 instruments, there wasn't, I guess, enough. I don't know if it was enough variety. There was something missing from this album for me. I would have liked to, maybe because it's almost like those genre, like light versions of those genres without going into some of them. Like I wanted more funk, but it never went that far, or I wanted more of that like Caribbean sound, but it never went that far in that direction. It always kind of reeled back, and that's not to the, detriment of the artist or the fault of the artist, but it's not what I was into. And then the organ as well, that's always kind of been, at least so far on our journey, it's been kind of a hit or miss instrument for me. I don't always like its use, and I didn't really like it on this album. It was too dominant for me, I think. In this album.
You're not a big organ guy, I know, because that I think you were the only person that had that you didn't like the Doors because of the organ. Where I think Matt and I are both like, the organ sometimes saves the Doors.
Yep.
So that's how I feel too. But
that's why I can't go into churches. No organ.
So I don't even know how to follow that one. I would say that I liked this out. There's nothing offensive about this. I will say that it felt like a 32-minute one track, and the songs that I liked almost felt like pieces of a jazz piece, like codas and stuff that you like. Like Rigor Mortis, I really liked the second track. This Is My Last Affair, I liked, and then Funky Miracle were probably my 3 favorite parts. Later on, there was a song called 9 Till 5, which I liked, but I'd be lying if I said it. At times, it didn't feel like some of the pieces ran together as one extended 32-minute piece.
Right.
With that being, I'm pretty sure these guys are from New Orleans as well, which is really interesting because we just did Dr. John in another segment. In fact, I'm pretty certain that's the case. And this is definitely a different type of New Orleans sound, for sure. I would say what really stood out to me, as I mentioned before, but the 4 pieces, and I would like to listen to this album again in 2 different ways. One would be to listen to the individual instruments like I do on jazz albums, and the other would be to listen to it from back to front to see if any tracks stand out to me when I listen to it the other way. You know what I mean? Because by the time I got to the end of this, it kind of felt a little samey, and I don't know if I was all in. I will say, though, that if you're thinking about listening to this, the drums, as Matt said, because they're reactionary and they sound, well, I was going to say they sound different, but you're kind of right, Matt. There is a lot of like offbeat playing in and not offbeat like not on tune, offbeat like off rhythm playing. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I just find that aspect of music, and we're certainly going to get into it more as we go through the decades, but offbeat stuff that kind of jumps in that you don't expect, I really like that. I think that is such an interesting way to present a song, and there's certain artists that do it really well, and this type of drumming, I'm sure, I don't know the dude, I guess is Ziggy Modest. I don't even know. I can pronounce his last name.
Like I said, I didn't do my research for these.
I'm just looking at. I do have the track listing up here on Wikipedia, and the guy's name is Ziggy Modestil or something. But it's fantastic, right? And I'm sure that that I wasn't hearing any of that type of drumming in anything that we were doing before. So I can only imagine that this was something that other drummers were like, yeah, man, I got to pick up on that. But it was also it probably was influenced by jazz as well, I would say. Well, because a lot of jazz music does have that as well. So there is that, I would say.
Well, I would say I like offbeat drumming more in jazz and like R&B than I do in rock, to be 100%. There's times where I like it, but it gets real old for me in rock music a lot of times. It's often, I think of it oftentimes in terms of songs that go a little bit too long for me.
Yeah.
But in
it's
jazz,
it's a little bit of a prog thing too, I think, sometimes.
In jazz it works though, because it's the improv. It's like you said, it's improv, but it's also it's very designed because you're listening to what's going on around you and you're consciously reacting to it. So there is a level of direction to it. But the thing that really stood out to me is a lot of times in jazz, it's in the background. Whereas this, it's as much in the front as, like, say, Keith Moon is, right? On, like, a Who album. And that's the thing that was really interesting to me. You don't often hear off, rhythm drum playing in the front of an album. And so I was like, it was the one thing that constantly kind of had my attention, to the point where I don't know if I gave the other instruments. I mean, the guitar wasn't there a lot, It was the instrument by far of the four, because the reason I knew it was four and the guitar was the other one I would have missed is because you see the cover and there's four guys on it, and it was immediately like, okay, there's a bass, there's a drum, and there's an organ. So there's obviously three of these guys are playing it, and each of those, the bass sounded like you would think funk bass sounds like, and the organ worked for me. It didn't overtake any songs. But I think the reason it didn't overtake the songs is because the drums were up front, making sure that it didn't, like, say, a Doors album, right, where the organ goes right to the front. It's almost like when Jim Morrison's not singing, right, the organ takes over. Yeah. In the Doors, by design. In this case, the drum sort of plays that role, and there are no vocals to counteract it. And there really isn't another instrument that I feel ever takes over complementary, like Doors, right? Jim Morrison voice and then organ, right? There's nothing to complement the drums as the upfront sound. So that was the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I it's hard for me to actually, because I heard this album several days ago, and again, I focused mostly on the drums, and by the time the album was getting towards the end, I was, again, not as, I don't know.
Same thing, Matt.
I wasn't really focused on as much, so it's hard for me to say, oh, I remember the guitar doing this. I remember the bass standing out. I mean, the bass stood out more than probably the guitar
music,
did as
so
well.
It's
exactly.
almost impossible to. Yeah.
Right. So I can't. It's hard for me to comment on the guitar. So that's a good point. Maybe with all those other instruments, because of the funk nature of it, because the drumming is so unique and kind of out there, and the organ as well. The organ's kind of prominent. Maybe just by default, the guitar takes it wasn't as maybe as focused on as some of the other stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I would never listen to this again. It did suffer from that. It just blended all together, and by the end of the 30 minutes, I was like, okay, I was probably good halfway through this. I was like, okay, I'm good. I get it. And that doesn't. I can't really hold it up in high regard as an overall album because of that. But it's still. Yeah, again, it's more of a unique type of album, and there are certainly parts of it that I did like.
It felt like walking music, from scoring you walking, but not like Isaac Hayes walking, more just like, walking on a day where you're happy, but not for any particular reason, and not in too much of a rush.
And again, I would also throw this in there. I would say that I would enjoy watching this live. This is another thing that I would say. If you're out like at a festival or something like that, or maybe you're in New Orleans and you're at something, and there's people playing this, and you're outside and you're having gumbo and you're having a beer or whatever. You're like, yeah, you'd be dancing to this.
But
this would be a really good thing to sit to
would
see.
You want to sit and watch it though, or would you want it to be in the background as you were moving between the tents?
I do a little bit of both, probably, John. I would not be as intent watching this as I would with other shows, but
I would be the second.
Be fun.
I would be the second. I feel like it's more background music for me than it is like must see.
Hey, do you know who the organ player on this was? Art Neville from the Neville Brothers.
Oh, really? Wow. Well, that makes sense. They are New Orleans then, because the Neville brothers are New Orleans. All right, so I wasn't going crazy. Okay.
And just for reference, this came in at 415 in the 1960s, and is not even the Meters' highest ranked album on Best Ever Albums. It's number 3, behind the Meters, which was from another 1969 album, and Rejuvenation, which was from 1974. And we are not covering that album, so this is. I don't think the Meters are on the Rolling Stone again, so this is the only time we're really talking about them, probably.
Gotcha. Well, we have 30 seconds. Any last comments here before we put a bow on this?
It's hard to standout tracks when there's no vocals to associate with them.
I couldn't. I don't know if I could. I could say "Look a Pie Pie" because that's the only one that they actually do vocals on. So the other ones I couldn't.
Yeah. I would say Rigor Mortis and 9 Till 5 were probably my 2 favorites if I were going to pick. But I would put this one in the only for the curious category on my scale. Mm-hmm. So.
Is that what? How? So you have a scale of 6, right? Is that a 3 or is that a 2, John?
That's on my scale. It's a 5 of 6. So it's
5
of 6.
Lower.
A little bit lower, but not offensive. But that's a good and bad thing. It's totally
but on
non-offensive.
On that scale, 1 is the best, though, right?
Yes, 1 is the best.
All right.
Yep.
Are you using your rubric to score these as well?
Oh, of course. Come on now. There has to be context for all this stuff. Yeah.
We need to get a statistician to like compile.
Oh, look at that! 15
John's.
Minutes. 15 minutes. We have to end it right there. That's the end of and it really was. It actually buzzed. So we'll leave that to another time for them to once again deconstruct my brilliant rubric of scoring. But yeah, the Meters, I would say for me, right in the middle, only for the curious. I can't not. That's a double negative. I can't not recommend, even though it's a double negative. But
I still got you. I say that. That's fine. John.
It's kind of. It's. So I don't know if I'd strong. I would strong recommend. Exactly. I can't recommend. That's what I was going for. How about you guys? Where would you say it falls?
Yeah, I don't have a strong recommend for this either. It's not. I've listened to some of the other jazz albums over this. I think that we've listened and covered.
I think if you're into music, I think they are good musicians, and if you're into musicianship and kind of definitely different like syncopation into drumming, like different types of in jazz, I think that I would recommend this for you. But yeah, I think only for the curious might be a good area to put it in, John.
Okay.